Across Europe, universities and startups have spent billions building the future of education, but scattered across the continent are what insiders call graveyards of innovation, EdTech projects that never reach the classroom. Not because the technology failed, but because no one asked teachers or students what they needed. Welcome to this special episode from the EIT EdTech Conference 2025 in Brussels. In this episode, we bring together voices from across education, industry, the public sector, and startups to explore what it really takes to build successful EdTech in Europe. I speak with leaders and innovators behind major pan-European STEM education initiatives, new forms of assessment, and research. We also explore how to rebuild trust, connect key stakeholders, involve students, and more. Beth Havinga joined me to view the data. Beth is the managing director of the European EdTech Alliance. It is a non-profit organization that represents under 30 countries and just over 2,600 different companies throughout Europe. What was the main message that you wanted to get across today?
I think I'm going to flip that and say one of the main messages that I've been hearing, because I think a lot of my job is listening and understanding what all of the different countries are going through and organizations and where the needs are. And I think if I listen to what was said throughout the day, there are some really clear needs in terms of understanding responsibilities and who owns what piece of the action that's necessary to change what happens in innovation within Europe and education, and how we put that into practice. And so the initiatives I was talking about today are small pieces of that puzzle, but I think there's a lot of other actions that need to take place. And some of the things that were mentioned today was anything from more targeted support for women in education through to different funding mechanisms that are aligned with the maturity level of companies, because within Europe we have such a strong representation of micro-organizations. So that's 1 to 3 man teams who are leading all of this development. So things like that. And then also understanding that no innovation is free, regardless of who's developing it. I think that's a really strong point that was raised by a number of the speakers today, to say that either you're selling data or you're selling some kind of access to yourself if anything's labeled as for free. And so understanding that there's this inherent ownership of the ecosystem that needs to be taken as a responsibility of the public sector, and understanding that, thinking through what kind of business models do we want to see where we have co-creation and design and the ability to really contribute to an innovation ecosystem.
Beth, are you taking one action from today? Did you learn something new today?
I think one thing that I took out of the co-creation labs that we ran this afternoon, it was that there's graveyards of innovation from multiple different perspectives. So there's this idea that there's a graveyard of EdTech innovations because we haven't had conversations with educators or schools. But there's also graveyards of technology that have been developed at universities that don't have a really good business support level. And there's also graveyards of EU-funded projects that never had a sustainability plan that meant that we could grow from them or take the learnings and take them into a new project. And so I think my biggest takeaway would be to understand how can we create knowledge exchange systems that mean we can grow from all of the learning that's taking place in projects, in development, in these research institutions, and make sure that we're growing towards a stronger European future and not just letting these little graveyards start to develop.
Emma Linsenmayer is an analyst for the Program for International Student Assessment, PISA, at the OECD. Emma, can you start by explaining your role within the PISA project?
So I'm working mostly on how we can innovate, how we assess and develop important skills for the 21st century.
In your presentation, you did share today a lot of data. What would be the highlights? How would you describe the trends that you presented today?
Yeah, I think that overall we see that digital education is increasing. And I think there's different levels of preparedness for this digital kind of revolution. And I think that one of the key takeaways that I think was important for the different discussions today was that access doesn't necessarily mean that students are able to thrive and so on. So it's really about how do they use these digital tools? How well are prepared our teachers to use these digital tools? And then if they have that and, a constrained amount of time, we see that there is increases in math performance and with their greater sense of belonging in school. And not only, I guess, the school, the teacher preparedness, but also then kind of the scaffolding that we can put in place with policies. And of course, that's what we work on at the OECD. So it's an important aspect.
I think you mentioned seeing a relationship between improvements in math, and the time spent with computers. But then you also saw after a certain number of hours actually was detrimental. You want to elaborate that point because there are so many debates and that shows like everything is a measured thing, right?
Exactly. I think it's all about the quality time being spent with the digital resources and the digital tools being used for a specific purpose, like learning. So, we see that it's a negative relationship if they're using it for long periods of time for leisure in the classroom. So it's important that it's kind of this scaffolded type of learning or scaffolded kind of use for the purpose of learning, where we see that it's a positive relationship.
Excellent. I thought that was really interesting because I hear so many debates about is it good or is it bad, and nothing ever is binary, right? So it's never as easy, but I thought that was really, really insightful. In the OECD, you're running, and you're working on the PISA, which is usually. Do you want to explain it? Because you can explain. Because I thought you've spoken today about new developments. Right. Do you want to talk about maybe what PISA has been done now for quite some time? Is it?
Yeah.
20 years.
Yeah, exactly. So it's the Program for International Student Assessment. Since 2012, we've introduced. So it's assessing over 90 countries and economies and their education systems and how well they're preparing their students in science, math, and reading, as well as then an innovative domain since 2012. And so I sit on the innovative domain team in the sense that we've been working on different domain assessments. Like in 2018, we did global competence. Then in 2022, it was creative thinking. And now in 2025, we're pretty much done with the kind of main survey for learning in the digital world. And so this is an exciting assessment, just especially not only because it's, of course, topical. I mean, it's looking at how students self-regulate their learning as they solve complex problems using digital tools. So it's very, something that students should be able to do and important for their futures in the digital world. But what another thing that's really important about it is that we've taken a lot of time and development efforts to make the assessment tasks innovative and technology enhanced so that we can actually collect the information we need from students as they're working on these complex problems. So it's open-ended. There are many different correct solutions, but we're able to kind of see differences in performance on these more complex tasks where students are agentic and they can make up their own solution. So it's a very innovative type of test being done at the international scale. And so we're looking forward to digging in and kind of innovating not only how we assess, but then how we report on how the students and of course, the education systems are doing. In 2029, we're already developing the assessment on media and AI literacy, which is kind of the other side of learning in the digital world. For learning in the digital world, we were focusing on computational problem solving, so modeling, programming. And then there was kind of missing that aspect of media and AI literacy and disinformation and making sure that students are able to understand what their social media and things like that are coming in. Being able to be critical about information. And then, then I would moved into more of our formative assessment platform that allows us to have this kind of research angle, but also to make these prototypes and all the development work we're doing on kind of engaging open-ended technology enhanced environments with embedded assessment. And so the idea was that we'd create this public good that could then go into classrooms and benefit the teachers and students who, of course, are,
And it gives you a lot of data as well.
Yeah. So for now, on the one hand, it's kind of a teacher feedback, student feedback loop that's supposed to be really just to help them. Teachers have the ability to customize these innovative type of learning environments to better understand their students. So it's really protecting that kind of loop between the students and teachers so that the teachers can then adapt instruction, they can help personalize learning, they can correct misconceptions.
So this is for the service of the teachers.
Yeah, exactly.
Formative assessment. Amazing.
And then there's also the research aspect, because we're moving more and more into using it for research. So for example, we're running an international randomized controlled trial that's being funded through the CERI governing board, which is another kind of part of the OECD education director in the OECD. And this is looking at the impact of an AI-enabled tutor for students who are learning maths. So does it, help to increase math learning? And what are the important aspects of creating these kinds of AI tutors that we all hear a lot about?
Exactly.
But what makes it useful? What makes it safe? How can we support the teachers and students?
Next, Professor Dana Redford joined me to talk about the impact of the Deep Tech Talent Initiative.
I'm on the advisory board of the EIT Deep Tech Talent Initiative, which is one of the EIT initiatives that has trained over 1.3 million people in deep tech. And this has been over a 2-year period.
Can you define deep tech?
Well, I encourage your listeners to look up deep tech. You're going to actually find the Deep Tech Talent Initiative, but it crosses many different areas, from AI to quantum computing to robotics. So it takes a lot of the new technologies that are being developed, and it is these areas where Europe needs more talent.
So tell us about this initiative. Run us through what you've achieved over the last 2 years with this initiative.
Yeah. So on the Deep Tech Talent Initiative site, you'll find over 235 courses. And this comes from over 620 pledge organizations that have pledged to train European talent in deep tech. And so this is a great initiative that has small ed tech companies to very large technology players, and all playing their part in educating people in this key area of talent.
And can anyone go and take any course? I mean, this is open to everybody?
Well, some courses are open, some courses are paid, and other courses are directed at, for example, university students, so you'd have to be enrolled, but others are open for those who are looking to upskill themselves and reskill themselves.
So are there all levels? So say somebody that, like me, for example, that doesn't, come from a scientific background or technical background, I could go on there and find something for them?
Definitely. We have everything from beginner level courses on AI to very technical types of courses looking at quantum computing and other things that might take an advanced degree to
for the wider public. What's in the pipeline and why we should be paying attention to these new trends?
Well, there's so many changes that are happening in Europe. I would point first to the demographic change, and we're going to need to have technology to help us deal with some of these changes that are coming to the continent and indeed to the developed world. And so many of these technologies will help make life simpler. We'll be able to live longer. So these are the reasons why we need to look in some of these high technology areas. And it's also where Europe really plays a strong role in innovating and being a market leader in the world.
In your talk today, you also talked about the future of this initiative. What's the future for this initiative?
Yeah, so deep tech is a very specific area where many people need to upskill that are already in industry, as well as those who are coming out of university. We are now moving towards the STEM area, and this means aligning with the STEM education strategy and the Union of Skills from the European Commission. This will be new initiative. So as we look beyond 2025, the Deep Tech Talent Initiative will actually be a little bit broader on STEM, so science, technology, engineering, and maths, and looking to help support that area, which is something that needs to be developed at the very early ages, even from primary and secondary school onto university and also continuing education.
Brilliant. It's been a very intensive day. This conference brings people across different stakeholder groups. That's one of the main remits. So did you learn something new today? Have you taken any new insights or taken some actions based on conversations today across the groups?
Yes. So I was the theme holder on how EdTech and the EIT initiatives could better work together. So one of the first things that we can say is that the EIT is a good practice from public-private partnerships. And if you look at the EIT knowledge innovation communities, the KICs, these are communities that are built with this knowledge triangle of academia, of research, and also of public sector, and looking at education. So these aspects come together in these public-private partnerships. And this is a potential model to scale EdTech because of this model of the knowledge triangle.
Thank you, Dana. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
Yeah, I would just encourage your listeners to look into some of the EIT initiatives, try to reach out and look at what the educational offerings are. There's lots on offer. So the EIT is really Europe's bet on innovation.
In the next part, Tobias Himmerich, the CEO of Eduvation, represents the voice and the perspective of EdTech startups in Europe, their challenges and what it takes to succeed. Tobias, first of all, can you tell me your role and what you're involved in?
Yeah, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Eduvation in Germany. We are a EdTech startup-focused organization supporting EdTech startups within the German market, helping them with the business model, at entrance, business coaching, consulting, sales, marketing, and so on. And so basically the business point of view in the EdTech scene, helping them to understand the market, because that's so important, that you are really set from the business point of view. And that's our role in Germany. And so we're the largest EdTech supporting agency in Germany.
And how long have you been in existence?
Eduvation is around there for 10 years, roughly.
Oh, wow. So you're very well established. And
Yeah, exactly. So because we started as an idea from startups for startups. So Eduvation is actually founded by successful startups because they want to give something back to the community, saying, when we back then had our startups, it was so hard. We had no one to ask. And so the idea was to actually found a supporting agency that helps the younger startups.
You're very much representing the EdTech startup side of things. You kind of very well understand the challenges, and there are a number of those that you're working on. Today, you came to talk about the EdTech, the European EdTech Alliance. Do you want to give me the main points?
Yeah, with the European EdTech Alliance, the basic idea a couple of years ago was that on the one hand, we have to have like one common voice from the industry on the policy level, so that on the European level and even on the national level, we have an entity, an alliance of alliances that is there to be a counterpart for the policy discussion, and so that the industry gets a voice, and that we have an organization that represents this industry on a European level. So that's one of the most important aspect of the European EdTech Alliance. And the other aspect in founding the European EdTech Alliance was that we as national organizations actually need a connection to our counterparts in other countries to learn from their problems, to see how they solve the common problems in their country, to learn from each other how to build a sustainable ecosystem. And also when our members in Germany, when they say, okay, I want to enter the Italian market, how does it goes in France, that we have someone that we can talk.
And how do you enable that? Because in fact, that was flagged as one of the major challenges. So throughout the day, this idea of, one of the barriers for scaling up, for growing is this kind of quite difficult to penetrate other countries, even within the European Union. So I think that's a very interesting point, like how are you helping? How are you able to help startups overcome that really big barrier for education and EdTech?
Yeah, that's one of the biggest problems the company faces, the EdTech company faces. And there's no easy answer to that, because there's no easy solution saying, we have an idea, if you do this and that, and then you can look at Europe as one single market. That's not the case. So what we do actually in Germany, or our other organizations, our member organizations of the European EdTech Alliance in the other countries, is you have to do one-to-one coaching. So there is no easy single answer to that question. Okay. It's really basic work with every client and every EdTech company. That's really quite a work.
But at least you're there to guide them. Are there any success stories? You've talked about a decade helping startups in EdTech in the European context.
To be honest, I don't have an answer to that.
Okay.
And because there's not, from my perspective, one single startup that does everything correct and everything right. One key learning that I always talk about is that you have these, when you think about startups, you always have this idea of scaling quickly and, doubling the turnover every couple of months. And I hadn't seen a single startup in EdTech with this hockey stick planning.
Yeah.
So the growth and the company development in the EdTech phase is linear. So it's
gradual.
Exactly. It's gradual. It's not,
well, I
exponential.
think that's a great message. And thank you, because I also work with startups as well in EdTech. And I do hear some ideas like become millionaires in a month.
Exactly.
And that still prevails. I don't see that happen. You're absolutely right. Like cases I know where they've scaled, they're like 14 years, 10 years in the making, and then they grow really big, but it's over time.
It's over time. It's increasing. It's slow. That's how the market is. And the problem is if you promise something else to your investors, you will have a problem. So you have to know how the market works to actually find the right investor, if you want an investor at all. So you have to understand the market to plan your company accordingly. And that's so important.
You've also been chairing a co-creation lab today, which was on AI. What did you learn from that co-creation lab today?
It was interesting because we had stakeholders from every, ministry, universities, schools, and the perspective on the topic of AI in education was so diverse. The problems they reported were so diverse that the only thing you could, have as a take out of that session was there is no easy solution to solve the problems because everyone has, different problems, different aspects of the theme. And if you then look on how long AI is widely accepted around, so ChatGPT started, 3 years from now. So in our, everyday life, AI is present for 2.5, 3 years maybe. And if you, for example, take a look on legislation processes or on teacher training. In Germany, a teacher training to become a teacher lasts 7.5 years. A legislation process for, adopting a new legal lasts for 1 up to 4 or 5 years. So the processes that are in place, they haven't reflected the AI practice what's out there. And so there are problems. There is not regulated stuff. No one knows how to buy stuff. No, so it's in the sector. It is like it is, and you can't change it in like a quick way. So we have to have patience and see what...
We have to be okay with not being okay.
Exactly.
And that's the hardest part. Next, we look at the Girls Go STEM project with Marta Lorusso. Marta, who are you and what do you do?
Marta Lorusso. I'm a digital education specialist for Girls Go STEM, which is an EIT community initiative. What we do is that we equip youth, especially girls, with digital, green and entrepreneurial skills through an online platform with many engaging courses and hands-on activities to teach them technology applied to sustainability.
I know you've had a lot of impact with this initiative. So what are the numbers in terms of the impact? I know you've reached very widely across Europe.
Since 2020, we've already trained more than 70,000 girls across Europe in more than 35 countries. And this is also thanks to our courses that are translated in all the EU languages. So we work with really with all the schools, not just in cities, also in rural areas. We really spread across Europe. And we have online, our platform is also growing. We started with a few courses and we now have more than 25 and we keep growing. And every year we add new content and we have also recently added content for teachers. So far we have focused on students, but now we also want to equip teachers with skills to teach AI, to be more...
Wow, what an amazing resource and very much needed now.
Yes, I mean, this also came from the discussion that we heard today, that it's we need to support teachers in this change. It's not just about having the technology, it's also making sure that teachers know how to use them and that it's useful for them.
You've got the initiatives to support the girls, but then now you're creating more resources so that teachers can actually...
Yeah, because in the end, our project and our content, our material is designed for the classroom. So it's true that any learners, any student, any girl or boy, they can create an account and start learning. But the content is made so that it's done in the classroom and is done with also collaborative learning with groups. They need to solve challenges in groups. And so we need also to support teachers in using these resources and having a new way of teaching also, because it's more interactive, it's fun, it's not the traditional teaching.
Yeah, exactly.
system.
So how is that? How do you find that side of the project?
Yeah, it's really interesting because, I mean, we didn't build this project for the evolution of the teaching method or styles, but we saw that it was like kind of a side effect, a positive side effect. We did some learnings, some surveys and some follow-ups, and we understood that this is also very important. So it opens up for us a new opportunity to go also in that direction. And we also understood that without engaging the teachers, we don't get to the students. I mean, we could maybe get to those that are more curious and more bright, and that they get curious on their own. But if we want to reach more students, we need to start with
exactly. So they need to embed it, and that's the gateway. So this is for any teachers. They can go in and use the resources.
It's mainly targeting high school teachers. So because our courses are meant for a target audience of 14, 19-year-old students. So, but anyone can create an account. So also teachers. And then if the teacher generally wants to create accounts for their schools, if schools are interested, then we create a special code for them, because they can use the platform in their own virtual schools, so that the teachers can follow the progress of their own students. So they will see who's enrolled, who completed the course. They have their own environment.
Okay, so now this is expanded to AI and everything. It's not just the circular economy, which...
Yes, exactly. But we already had courses about AI and the circular economy. Everything was really tied to sustainability. In any case, we have robotics, the future of robotics and the circular economy. And then we had more STEM, so more I'm from EIT Raw Materials. There are courses about materials like metals, plastics, but it's always in the aspect of recycling and reusing and understanding how these materials are important, how they're sourced, so that students get more aware of this. It's always with this vision of sustainability behind. And I think this will not change, but we will maybe open up to other STEM disciplines also. Now, for example, we've always covered topics that were in line with what the communities, knowledge innovation communities of the EIT were doing. But we are now thinking of going beyond and having courses on aerospace or really
quantum
computing. Exactly. Really would like to go more beyond what we are used to do and be more
growing, basically. Last but not least, Sharon Flynn came to represent the university perspective on EdTech and innovation. She reflected on important themes about encouraging student collaboration and partnership in universities, and also on trust between EdTech and universities. Sharon, would you like to introduce yourself? Tell us what you do.
Sure. So I've been working in higher education for the last 30 years. I started out as an academic lecturer in computer science. I then moved into a Centre for Teaching and Learning at my university, which is the University of Galway in the west of Ireland.
What was your presentation about and the main key insights to share?
One of the main points that I made during the talk today, and that I would really like to get across, was that we need to have more student voices in the room. We need to have a diverse set of student voices, because every student is individual, and it's not good enough to have a student representative, because every student's experience is different, and we need to hear and to understand and to listen to a diverse range of students. So when it comes to talking about policies or implementation of policies or curriculum development, we need to have students in the room who can, from the beginning, who can contribute from early on, rather than at the end when we're looking for looking for their feedback.
Yeah, just asking for their opinion, like, do you agree with this? Right, which is our model.
Which is how it happens mostly. Yeah. And we use surveys, and students are fatigued from surveys, but
it's not meaningful. Anyway. So do you know any good models of student collaboration to lead these big transformation, big changes that we are tasked with basically as the sector.
So I can speak to a couple of models that I have seen that have worked through the two projects that I've worked on. So, for example, on the Enhancing Digital Teaching and Learning project, which was the first one, there was always a pillar in that around having student involvement, student partnership. I was very keen to actually employ a student associate intern who would work with me, was paid a salary, who was a full-time student. And this was their part-time job, which so many students have, right? And he worked as part of the project for about a year. And actually he worked with us during COVID. And it was so successful and so impactful that we then rolled out the model so that in each of our 7 partner universities, they each employed a student associate intern. And in fact, some of the universities employed more than one, so they could see the real value in it. And just one simple example of how those students were useful was in one of the universities, in the staff training, this student would come along as a sort of a co-facilitator for staff training. So if they were talking, for example, about podcasting, here's how easy podcasting is. Here's the types of things that you can do with podcasting. The student was able to say, well, in my course, maybe this lecturer provides podcasts, or maybe this person has done something around student podcasts. And this is how it has impacted me. This is how it has impacted on my friends. And so the staff who are being trained are hearing about the impact on students, and that is more persuasive.
Definitely, than just
right?
having, yeah.
So that's one model. Models that we had in my second project, we had an open call across the 7 participating institutions for staff-student projects. The boundaries around it was that they could apply for up to €5,000 in funding. The type of project that could be proposed had to align with the core themes of the project. But apart from that, basically, as long as there was at least one staff member and at least 2 students who were coordinating it, then they were eligible to apply. And what that did was it empowered students to come forward with their own ideas. So things like, I don't know, we want to introduce a breakfast club for students, or we want to we want to develop a tool, a study tool for our fellow students. So there were all sorts of different projects that were proposed. Some were artistic projects, some were projects that were integrated within the curriculum. Some were projects where students just recognized a need on campus and they thought, wouldn't it be great if I was given permission to do this? And as long as they had a staff member who supported them, then they were allocated the funding. And what we found was that this had a huge impact, both on the students who were directly involved, but also wider, because for every project, there was many other students who were impacted. So we did an evaluation of that, and we have a report showing the wider impact. But it also empowered those individual students to actually recognize, here's something I can do, here's something that I can contribute to, and I'm going to get the support for that. And the feedback that we got was actually the money wasn't the important thing. In many cases, they didn't need the funding, and it wasn't actually spent in some cases. What was important was the empowerment and the permission to say, yes, we recognize that. Go ahead and do it.
It's the agency.
That's
right?
it, exactly. So those are 2 examples.
I think that's the way forward, but I don't see these kinds of initiatives spreading fast enough. Sharon, in your talk, you touched on something that I thought, well, there's been a lot of talk throughout the day about trust. And that's the main barrier for EdTech. There are lots of EdTech representatives here, lots of startups, lots of talk about we want to see EdTech grow. And you've talked about your 30 years of experience, and you've talked about a loss of trust. And I thought your insight into that relationship, although there were many comments and many layers to how that trust needs to be built. But I thought it was interesting, your experience of that. If you'd like to comment on that loss of trust, looking at EdTech from an academic perspective.
Yeah. It was interesting because I hadn't thought about it before I came here today, but the first panel was talking about trust. So essentially, in my role within the Centre for Teaching and Learning, I mentioned that I had been working with educational technologies, training of staff, but I was also involved in procurement of technologies. I maintained relationships with many of the providers, which I felt was absolutely necessary. But over the years, I noticed that maybe from early on, where I had been working perhaps with startups or with companies that were just getting their feet on the ground, there was really good, like that partnership that was going on. So they were listening to us. We were listening to them. There was a lot of goodwill happening. But what I found was that very often, maybe a startup reaches a certain point where the company now gets sold to a bigger company. And in some cases, that bigger company gets sold again to another one. And that relationship gets lost, particularly if you're working with a very big multinational. You can't just sort of get on the phone to somebody and say, look, we're having this problem, or we'd love if your system did this, or this doesn't really suit us. And that was gone suddenly. And so I certainly personally have become very wary of EdTech vendors or people who have great ideas. I mean, it's fantastic, but I think this question over the longer term sustainability and continuous relationship. So yes, it would be great to, partner with an EdTech company, with a startup. Maybe they have a great idea that's fabulous, but have they thought about what happens in 5 years' time? In 10 years' time? Because in a university, that's important. You need to have that long-term relationship.
And I think
that's sustainability, because you can't retrain your staff to use a new system every 2 or 3 years. It's just impossible.
Today, we've all had a real opportunity to talk to very different people. What did you learn today?
I found the day absolutely fascinating. I think probably the main thing I've learned, and it's related to what you've just been saying, is I really got a sense of the willingness for EdTech innovators to work with educators, which is fantastic. But I think that there does need to be a lot more partnership and a lot more consideration of those longer term relations and that collaboration. I think that really has to happen. And that I wasn't expecting to get that out of today, to be honest.